Welcome to Collab Not Multiplayer. I'm Honeyshuckleex.
I'm Zachbot Barbecue.
And I'm Giggleclutz. And today we're going to talk about Manifold Garden. Manifold Garden is a puzzle game that was released in 2020 by William Chyr, Chyr Studios. And it's the only game that they've produced, and it seems like it might be a one-person studio from an artist out of Chicago. And the website's very nondescript. I didn't really get into their CV, but that's basically all that's there. It's $19.99 on Steam. This episode and the game itself are not going to have any trigger warnings, except for the game will be triggering if you have a severe fear of heights. It may be disorienting if you find playing with gravity disorienting, because that is a core mechanic of the entire thing. And it involves pretty much no reading. I think that's the basic caveats that we want to talk about.
Yeah, I think that hits all of them.
So, Shuckle, you want to describe the game for us?
Alright, so Manifold Garden is a three-dimensional puzzle game where the whole gimmick is that when you are next to a wall, you can make that wall your floor. And you're introduced to this in a very room-based environment with windows to the outside, but as you step outside, you realize that literally everything is a repeating fractal, which means if you fall, you will eventually end up right back where you started. And you can use this to your advantage to make, for example, jumps that you couldn't make, or just endless loops. And it's also done in this sort of line art style. And it's very, very plain on the surface. But it uses this to its advantage by using these simple lines to create very elaborate architecture. Incredibly elaborate architecture at some points. Just endlessly repeating forever.
Endlessly means forever, yeah. Yeah. It's been described as exploring architecture through gravity or vice versa. And yeah, it's very geometrical. It's all made of right angles, I believe. I'm trying to remember if any of it... But it's not pixelated. It has its very own aesthetic. I encourage you to go and look it up, either on Steam or YouTube or whatever, and check it out if it at all interests you. It's beautiful. And the scale is... It plays with infinity. I mean, it goes on forever, and things are so big.
So large. Like, if you see something in this game in the distance, the thing is that you know that that's very far away, but you also know that you are also right there. And it's mind-bending.
Yeah, it definitely is mind-bending. In fact, I was a little worried when I saw it recommended, because it reminded me of some things that are hard for me to navigate. Like, I tried to play the game Unfinished Swan at one point, and it turns out I can't even watch people play Unfinished Swan. That invisible things, I don't know, it didn't work. My brain would literally hurt. My eyes hurt. My brain hurt trying to play that game, trying to watch that game, and I was afraid the same thing would happen during Manifold Garden, so I was hesitant to buy it, even though it was getting recommended to me quite a bit, because I do love puzzle games, and, Steam's happy to sell me more. And it turned out it was fine to be able to play. And the other thing is big environments can mess with me too. And it turns out that I was able to, once I got used to it, just played it a little bit, it was not that hard for me to handle, and I've been able to play it and played it several times now. Sackbot, you want to talk about the gameplay and about how that plays out and how the puzzles work?
So yeah, essentially what its recursive nature does is, like, it ends up, both being this strong aesthetic element and, how the game catches you when you fall. It's like, no matter how far you go, you're not really going to lose any progress, because you'll end up back where you're... Yeah.
Either where you're going or where you started.
Falling off of places and having to clamber back up is not a huge issue in most of this game.
And no fall damage.
Well, I mean, I sure hope not. That would be one of the worst gameplay decisions anybody making this kind of game could make.
It's like, yeah, if you implement that, then there's basically, no point of, being able to, fall off of things and land back onto them becomes irrelevant, because mush. Anyway.
Right. Because in case we didn't get it across, it's the equivalent of skydiving. It's or platform diving. I mean, the scope and scale of this freaking game, and you're expected to jump off of cliffs, basically, but they're not normal Earth or planetary landscape cliffs. These are architecture cliffs. Everything looks like a building. It all looks like beautiful architecture.
So yeah, these buildings are in, these massive open spaces. Just the only thing it seems to be built off of is itself. But, that's not really, that's definitely a thing in the game that serves a functional purpose, but that's not really what the puzzles are about so much. So, the idea is, a lot of it revolves around the climbing on the walls bit. It's you're not Spider-Man-ing this up or anything. It's you're stepping onto the wall, and that is... If it's under your feet, it's down now.
And, everything in the game applies to this principle. If it has an arrow facing toward a surface, that's where its gravity is.
And it's only active when its gravity is active. So if there's a block with a purple arrow on it, it means it's only active. You can only pick it up off the floor when you have purple gravity on. And I say that like that because they do color code it. The walls will have a tinge of the color that's active during that directional gravity, and there's 6 directions, 6 colors. You're inside a cube or on the outside of a cube or something like that. I mean...
D&D fans be like, cube.
Minecraft fans be like, huh?
So, yeah, basically, what this means for the cubes is, when you're aligned with the same gravity as them, they're, physics objects you can pick up and, set on buttons and stuff. Or just, place them somewhere in the environment. But when you switch gravity away from them, if they're now on the wall, they hang there. It is now sort of a protrusion from the wall you can set stuff on top of or jump off of. It's they sort of become a shelf or a platform to use in the puzzle.
Also, I want to note that jump off of is with quotation marks. It's more like step off of. You don't have a jump button.
Right. Yeah. And that's part of the mechanics. The game wouldn't work if you could jump. I mean, it would, but it's hard. Some of these puzzles are hard enough without adding in a how far can I jump distance mechanic.
Yeah, this isn't Super Mario Galaxy. This is something else.
So yeah, if you liked the Stanley Parable for its lack of a jump button, you'll like this game too.
It's a major selling point. No jumping.
Except there's free falling. It's I want a game where I can't jump, but I can skydive. Manifold Garden is for you.
Yeah, that's an interesting little distinction about how the term jump off of something doesn't necessarily, you can do the action that would describe without technically jumping.
Right, and if that's video game logic, again, GM.
Semantics!
But it does make a difference in the way the mechanics work. If you play the game, you will absolutely understand. And the lovely thing one of the things I really love about the game, and one of the most positives I find in the whole thing, is how good the tutorial is. It's rather than a sit down and teach you how to play the game, the first few levels are the tutorial, and every new mechanic is added in a absolutely controlled environment. If you don't understand this mechanic, you are not going to be able to open the door and move on to the next section. And then they will immediately use it again right afterwards. So that way, okay, do it again and understand how we can add to it. we'll play with it, but we'll make sure you know it first, and then we'll let you do it again in a little bit different context so you can see how the puzzle variation's gonna go.
So yeah, it introduces you to a new facet of the puzzles, and also makes you use it immediately in another puzzle. So it's not just like it's going to be all front-loaded, tell you everything you need to do for the whole game, and just expect you to remember what to do an hour later.
Or days, months, whenever you get back to playing the game. No, the mechanics will be all right there, and yeah, it's beautifully done. I think it's one of the best tutorials I can ever remember.
Yeah. Like, I think one of the closest comparisons I could make is Portal, where you're constantly learning new things you can do throughout the game, and learning those things is part of the puzzle. You grow to have a deeper and deeper understanding of the game.
Yeah, it's like I can see a lot of facets of Portal in it, especially with the spaces that act weird. Just taking sort of, at least aesthetically, sometimes in practical applications and gameplays, like taking that idea of linking 2 points in space together to the extreme.
And it's non-Euclidean in a lot of ways. There'll be a portal and it'll take you to a completely different area, but it'll be an area that is absolutely physically and graphically compatible with where you are as you pass through.
Mm-hmm.
There'll be times when you have a doorway will be technically a portal and you'll have to direct something through there.
And it'll from the outside it'll look like it's just kind of vanishing, but like as you walk, as you follow the thing, you'll just be like, oh yeah, it's just in here now.
Yeah, it's like you'll run into some, spots where like doors lead to the wrong side of the space you'd expect, or a hallway is longer on the inside.
Mm-hmm. Right, but I never feel jerked around when this happens. They're doing it just to play with space, and it feels playful. It never feels like the game is trying to trick me or trying to jerk me out of my experience. I think the game loves its own space, really. I think the game wants you to run around and figure out what it's like now to be on the ceiling, now that the ceiling is the floor, and, oh wow, that piece of what looked like decoration from the floor actually is a staircase once you are now on the ceiling that was the floor, and all those kinds of things. And it's fun. It encourages play, it encourages exploration, even though it is non-Euclidean in some spaces and infinite every time you go outside something that's a building, and the buildings themselves repeat. I get lost really easily, traditionally. I'm getting better about that. I am healing from a lot of things that make it easier for me to not get lost anymore. But traditionally, if somebody's going to get lost in a space, it's me who's going to get lost. And I didn't get lost in this game. This game did a very good job of utilizing like visual clues and just dramatic flow of space, which, means that, it definitely uses architecture sense to direct the eye to kind of show you where you need to go. Which there is a main flow gameplay and then a secret flow gameplay.
Whoa! Oh my god! Spoilers in my Manifold Garden?
That's not a spoiler. It's obvious once you get in there that there's something else going on. But if you just follow the main flow gameplay, you can have a completely succinct, and a complete experience of the game, see all of the areas, all the major areas, and complete all the intended puzzles. There's a main line, and then there's, secret mode, which is told to you in the achievements. The achievements, I'll teach you that. I don't know if secret mode's even possible without a guide. Okay, I tried to do it with a guide, and I still ended up being like, nope, I'm out. At one point, I was just like, no, I'm out. But that's for its own reasons. I still think the game is wonderful. I've played it like 3 times through, just as the playthrough, and all of that. And I want to talk about for a second why I ended up bringing this to you guys as a game to play together, because it's not an obvious choice for play together, and I'm going to state right now that it's not necessarily a great one to play together, just because of the nature of how do you help someone navigate puzzles in a three-dimensional space with variable gravity. How do you put what you want this other person to do into words?
Hey, can you go green for a minute?
It's like, yeah, change the blue wall to up. What? And then go left. From here?
Which left? My left. What is your left?
I can't go green. There's no green wall here.
Right. Exactly. So it's not the easiest one to share the experience of. It's, if one person's going to be mostly just playing and somebody else is watching, that's fine. The main reason I played it together with the kids is because, one, I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to navigate the environment at all. I didn't know if it was going to be something that I was going to get lost in, just from the look of it, watching, the trailer videos on Steam. I wasn't sure if it was gonna trigger me visually. And between those two things, I didn't know. But I liked the idea of it enough, and it was highly recommended enough that I bought it and started to play it. And then I kind of got stuck on some puzzle, and I don't remember what it was. And I wasn't sure if it was just me not figuring out the puzzle or whether I was having an interface problem, because platforming is not one of my strengths. I'm more of a point and click kind of kid a lot of the time. So, kid. So I wanted to play it with my kids to see if it was a me problem or whether I just needed to grind it a little bit more and do the puzzle. And it turns out that I can handle the puzzles and the environment just fine. And so while we were playing it together, I would, every session we had, I would immediately go back to my save afterwards, breeze through that puzzle. I got stuck the last time now that I'd seen Honeyshuckle finish it. And then I would go as far as I could until I got stuck again, until next session that we played. Therefore, I didn't have to ever dip into a playthrough or look up hints or anything like that. And I had a very enjoyable experience, and I was playing it basically twice simultaneously. But I also, because of the nature of the game, think it's a game that families can play together, but it might be frustrating to try and help somebody through puzzles unless you guys have a dynamic where you change turns driving. Right? It's like somebody gets stuck and then you tap out and have the other person drive. We were trying to have the same person drive and then try and give them verbal cues on how to solve a puzzle, which that's tough. It's hard to breach across that. But since it's not what the game is designed for, it's certainly not a flaw of the game. It's a flaw of the way that I was trying to brute force us into playing, right? That's not the game's fault.
Yeah, that's it does highlight something that's very interesting about this game when you really try and communicate with it with a team of 3, is just the fact that it's like the game is perfectly playable, but somehow manages to be fairly indescribable.
Yeah. Like, I can't state enough how everything looks the same. I mean, it looks gorgeous, it looks fascinating, but at any area, you could take a picture of, like, any area in the game, and I would not be able to tell you, like, chronologically when it would happen. Because a lot of games, they have, like, their different worlds, and they're distinct from one another, and set a tone of progression. This game doesn't do that.
Anytime you're inside a building, except for a very few areas, it could be any building. And the distinct ones, you visit more than once. So you can't put them into a narrative line.
Yeah.
It doesn't help that the only exits from one building to another on the inside of the buildings.
Yeah.
Just realized that now.
Right. So, I mean, yeah, that's dynamic stuff that nobody needs to worry about if you're trying to decide whether or not you're going to play the game, but it's interesting. Mm-hmm. We were noting the lack of story and the lack of that it's hard to remember, what do you like about the game? It's like, well, I had this vague feeling about, it was a pleasant game, and the puzzles were fun, and, I wasn't ever bored. There was no There's a wide variety of puzzles using very few mechanics, which is an achievement. That's an achievement. Everything's aesthetically beautiful the whole time. It does play with gravity. It does play with scope and scale. It does play with non-Euclidean space. It does all these amazing things. It doesn't make memory the way most video games do. There's not a storyline that you're playing on. In fact, you don't even have to do these things in the same order, a lot of them. So,
these spaces are as non-Euclidean as the story, and I could have phrased that the other way around, but there you go, it's non-Euclidean in my comparison.
Non-Euclidean storyline.
Oh boy.
Glad they didn't have one of those specifically in Stanley Parable, though.
Oh gosh, no.
The line they did give us was enough.
Yeah, and if you don't know what that means, I don't know how to describe it right now. I will try on the blog. So yeah, there's a hint at a story, but there's no story to speak of. There's no spoken language to speak of, and
there's not even evidence of any people. There's buildings, but it's not like there are tables and chairs or any objects
aside from buttons to push to open doors and blocks to put on spots to open doors.
Doors, buttons, bigger buttons, pressure plate kind of buttons, and trees.
Yet none of those are like living spaces. You wouldn't go here and be like, oh, a kitchen, or look at that nice bed. Like, no, it's rooms. It's rooms. The closest, like, real-world rooms you could potentially say Manifold Garden has is a chapel and a greenhouse.
Okay, I can't argue with that. I cannot argue with that. So, the consensus among us, though, is since this is a review video, which I didn't note out loud on this recording, but we're going to note in everything else that this is a review video, is that we all give it the thumbs up. It's a good game. It's a positive game. It's worth the money.
Yeah.
It's a game that manages to be, as we said, kind of forgettable in a lot of ways, but not disappointing.
Right. And the forgettableness leads to, in my opinion, a replayability that some puzzle games lack because of the narrative structure of the puzzles. If the puzzles are a part of the storyline, you're going to remember them, which means they're no fun to solve the second time around. And this gets around it a little bit by also having the secret levels and that kind of thing. But even if you get frustrated by those, you can play the main pathway through the puzzle structure again. And because it's immersive. When you're in there, but since there's no storyline to anchor you into memory in a real way that connects to the outside world, I don't remember any of those memories. When I'm back in the game, I'm back immersed again. But usually when I'm solving a puzzle, I'm so focused on the puzzle that later on when I come back, I might remember kind of how I do it, but it's still mechanically challenging to make it happen. Finding the solution is only part of it. Putting the solution into place is also part of the mechanic of what makes the game and what makes the game fun.
Yeah, and on a similar note, of immersion, the soundtrack is immersive. When you step outside, you have, grand, sweeping sound. Maybe a little bit too loud and overbearing, but it sets, the grandiose of the infinity that you find yourself in, but alone, it's not particularly noteworthy. It's just when you put all of these things together do you have an experience that is enjoyable.
Which is Honeyshuckle's nice way of saying that she's not a big fan of the soundtrack.
No.
And Honeyshuckle's really big on soundtracks.
And it's I am, I will say that I definitely enjoy the kind of, ambient music, which, is, kind of stuff you might genre classify the soundtrack in this game, but it is the context that gives it that makes its listening experience really click.
Right. I found, like you were saying, I think the soundtrack is a big part of the immersion of the experience. I never sit there in the game and go, oh, I'm really enjoying the music right now. It's just kind of part of the space. And other people may have a different experience of that, but when you're used to some other games that, either really have bops or, I don't know.
Like, how I'd say it is, like, the soundtrack is not iconic. Like, there are lots of games that have iconic soundtracks. Undertale, Inscription, Hollow Knight. These all have soundtracks that if you listen to it, you can be brought back to that moment that you first heard it or something memorable that happened to you. But you don't get that same feeling necessarily with Manifold Garden, because a lot of the music features, like, slow build-up or just a wow.
And I've likened it to the ambient music they put in museums or as preludes to performances or that kind of thing, where it sets the stage for something else, but it doesn't take the stage itself.
So basically the soundtrack is functional and immersive, and it helps with the experience.
The mixing in the game might be a bit rough, but it absolutely sets the mood.
So, our overall experience of Manifold Garden is a positive one, with good and varying puzzles, with an amazingly beautiful aesthetic, although because of its limitations, it's not super variable or memorable in that. Would you agree?
Yeah. Like, I think that it's definitely an experience that was curated for all of these pieces to be together. And it's when you put them in isolation or try to remember a specific point in the experience that it starts to fall apart. Just a little bit. I'm not saying that, like, scrutinizing it makes it bad.
Honeysuckle, what was the most memorable moment of this game for you?
I want to say the most memorable thing for me is there's this sort of immense hallway that's basically just kind of a giant intersection, and in this giant intersection there are enormous gravitational blocks that fall according to gravity, as they do. But it's a hallway with giant falling blocks, and you have to fall the blocks in a particular direction so they stack on top of each other in order to solve the puzzle.
And I wasn't laughing at you, sweetie. I was just laughing at the idea that gravity's a variable, because most of the time it isn't. That's a weirdness to this game. It's like, oh, these blocks fall according to their own personal gravity when you turn it on. And that made me laugh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I swear it makes more sense visually, but that's how this game rolls.
Yeah. It is a very visual experience.
Yeah, those of you who've played the game probably know what I mean by a giant hallway with enormous blocks.
It's like, yeah, I don't even remember the scene you're describing. I remember the blocks, but not like that.
They're in more than one scene, and it's not even the first one you see them in. So, that's the weirdness of this game, because it doesn't have that narrative flow, a storyline to pull you through. You can remember things out of order and the wrong place, not necessarily the same amount of times. I've just played it more times than you guys, so I know.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, really, it doesn't have a story or a plot. It has a progression which is visible sometimes.
Ooh, look at all the big concepts.
Look, that's what Sackbot's good at. He drops at least one of those an episode.
Now we need a tagline for that.
No, we
Sackbot
don't.
drops it now.
We don't need a tagline for everything.
But taglines are fun.
Taglines are fun, says Giggleclutz.
Yeah, but it's like, with we can celebrate it when it happens, but I don't want to make it too much of a signature segment in case it just doesn't happen in an episode.
Okay, fine. No, I mean,
I don't want to
really
feel pressured to do that.
Right.
What about your favorite, or not favorite, but your most memorable moment?
So yeah, when I was really thinking about how the gravity mechanics affect stuff you see in the puzzles, one of the interesting ones is waterfalls. So basically, normally it's just when you're aligned with the gravity of the water, it's just going to do what water does when it has somewhere to go.
Flow.
It's going to flow, like reach edges and spill off in waterfalls. So yeah, it behaves roughly how you'd expect water in a sort of, it stays in currents, makes flows and waterfalls, but when you turn away from it, when you're no longer aligned with it, when it's not falling down anymore, it stops falling and acts solid. It suddenly becomes a bridging between where it's falling from and where it lands. Meaning that as you manipulate the flow of the water, it connects places.
Which was, I found, a very cool mechanic in the game, and it leads to such interesting aesthetics, both to have the water flowing, and it also plays with the wraparound effect of the repeating fractal nature of the world, so...
Yeah, when it's like previously you could fall off of outdoor areas and land back onto them, but now you get to see it from another perspective where you have the water doing that.
Yeah, and the water just creates a sort of seamless effect where it's just like, yeah, if it can't go over anymore and just is going down infinitely, it'll merge into one strip of water.
So yeah, it's really neat to see another mechanic that can really, express that facet of the game's design like that.
Yeah, thank you for reminding me. I enjoy revisiting in my mind that visual representation of how this interesting world works. Because that's one thing this game creates beautifully, is this consistent, interesting world. Beautiful. It's very aesthetically pleasing to be in this architecture. And then, so for me, my couple memorable moments from this game, and one of which is when you first make it through all the tutorial rooms in the first building, and then the only choice you really have after that, except to go right back into these enclosed spaces that do nothing, is to jump off the edge into the infinite and fall off the edge, walk off the edge, because we have no jump button. And just that level of trust, because I hadn't seen anybody do it yet. I'd never watched a playthrough, and I wasn't playing with the kids yet. And so I had to trust it, and just like, okay, I guess that's what I'm supposed to do. I wonder what happens if I jump. And you do, and then you realize that that's a core mechanic of the game, is that you have to do this free fall. And you have to risk that free fall. And it's interesting. That hit emotion just as much as anything else. It's being exposed to these gigantic spaces and then being expected to free fall through them. That's a memorable experience with this game. And the other is my least favorite puzzle set, and this comes up twice in the game, is there's these times when you have to maneuver a gigantic marble. The marble is as big as you, through enclosed tubes that you rotate gravity to make them fall through the tubes, and your vision is obscured. You cannot see some of the places you expect this marble to go. And while I could navigate these spaces fine, much better than I expected to, In fact, I enlisted help thinking I might not be able to do it, which is why we were playing the game together, but trying to do these areas where I have to rotate the world to make a marble flow through tubes, and sometimes I can't even see the tubes. My imagination could not handle all of the mechanics of trying to hold that 3D space in my brain. I could navigate it, but I couldn't visualize it and utilize it in that way. In the way I might be able to, solve a word puzzle, per se, or something like that from a different game. Using these 3D mechanics in a way that expected me to visualize them in my imagination was not something I could do without help. I had to Well, I could, brute force it, kind of, in one case, and I needed to use a guide for the other case, because I would try and end up finding the marble again right back where I started. And it got so frustrating that, I even went so far as to make myself a little cube that would try and help me do it, because you think you're supposed to do it via sound clues. I don't know if that's spoilery, but...
How I, remember doing these puzzles is when possible I would stand on the tube, and then I would know which direction would make the ball go backward, and then I'd just have to walk around the tube and, jump off the side and manipulate gravity that way.
Yeah, but you're thinking of the one where you can be on the tubes. I'm thinking of the one where you have to do it through the window. And so, that's not going to make any sense to people who haven't played the game. But trust me, it's complicated. While we might be describing this as like a building, and you're rotating a building and yourself within a building, there's a lot of layers to the things they did with the creativity of the puzzles.
So notably, it's the one of those I remember is where it becomes kind of difficult to solve is just the fact that the setup with the marble and the pipes is so huge, and there's a structure in the middle of it you have to walk on that's it's obscuring large parts of the puzzle at the time, so you can't take it all in at once, and in order to get to those different spots, you have to change gravity, which can send the marble in the wrong direction, meaning even if you found the place it did go, it might not be there when you arrive.
Right, because you don't just have to orient the marble, you have to orient yourself, and it's complicated, but that's part of the joy of the game, is that you really are playing with architecture and space and gravity simultaneously in ways that I've never been exposed to before. I really do think this is a very good game, and until we were really getting into the nitty-gritty of the memorable bits of it, I'd kind of forgotten what was so immersive and interesting about it. The thing is it's really hard to remember what you did after you leave, because that space mostly only makes sense when you're in it. So, don't take our, I don't remember that much about it, as a bad thing. It's not immersive in the way that some other thing, it's immersive when you're in it, but it's not writing memory the way that more narrative games do. And so it can be harder to recall. And that's not a detriment. In fact, like I said before, I think it actually adds to the possible replayability of the game. And I look forward to the next one, because rumors are they're making another one, right?
Yeah, that is the rumor. There was allegedly a tweet.
Ooh!
Yeah, I think the thing that makes the effect of, remembering the game weird is just the fact that it is a game that is willing to be in a world of its own, and is kind of hard to ground it back. It's hard to take that out of the screen with you, because it doesn't fit. It doesn't want to.
And it doesn't have to.
Beautiful.
Indeed. And definitely worth breaking your brain over. Yeah, so I highly recommend this game. I'm really glad we played it. I'm glad it's a shared experience in our family, and I hope you do too.
Now, join us next week for a game that's maybe not worth breaking your brain over.
Next episode.
God damn it, I do that all the time. Next episode, we're gonna be talking about Return to Monkey Island.
Dun, dun, dun.
And it's going to be our first rant episode, rather than a review.
That's gonna set the tone pretty well for that. But until next time, I'm Honeyshuckleex.
I'm Sackbot Barbecue.
And I'm Giggleklutz. Thank you for joining us with Collab, not multiplayer.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.